that's how easy it is. So that is how we use technology now. One guy sitting does a show. I call it a show. So
I've been doing quite a bit of these in the last couple of weeks in preparation for this book launch. I was on an all-day. I facilitated an all-day retreat yesterday by this technology, and by the end of it, I was just blitzed. It's a lot.
yeah. I know. I think it does create a problem because there was someone who was at that Danny Weinstein's show. So she was supposed to come another show with me, and then she said that she's got sciatica pain, and she thinks it's because of sitting too much.
Yeah, I could believe that. I have a little stool under here that I often put my feet up on because just to get the change the position sometimes.
So what I do is I keep moving around. I don't want to put too much pressure for too long on any part. So it might seem funny to people that I keep moving, but I would
I do the same thing. I do exactly the same thing. And if people don't like it, well, I think that's
exactly why should just a little pressure going there. So anyway, so Bernie, thank you very much for coming back on to the show. And obviously we were just about started in the last episode, and like I told you, we were at the point your mother's growing up and what is coming, no one knows, and she's in a small place, so how much of the news comes in, whatever happens. So we were there.
But my mother was in a big city. My father was in a small town.
Yeah. But one thing, what we do is before we start, why not have a look at the new book that you've taken out? Let's have a look at that, and then we can, because obviously, like we're going to do that show talking books on the 24th. Yeah. So of course, for Team Bernie, this is
not the book.
No, it is not. But Team Bernie, where does this come from?
Well, you asked me to put together pictures and so I had all my family pictures together, and I had that picture in there too. So I thought, well, all right, that's my team.
But where was this used?
That was actually from Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign.
Okay.
I saw somebody selling a T-shirt at a just something I was at with my son. So I took the picture and I thought, well, all right, I'll share it with you.
Okay, so this is the book. This is the new book.
The Neutrality Trap, Disrupting and Connecting for Social Change, which I co-authored with my long-term partner from Creighton University, who's now at the Eastern Mennonite University, director of diversity, equity, and inclusion there, Jackie Funk Guzman. And this is a book that maybe I'll just say a few words about it. It really looks at the connection between conflict work and peace work and social change. And I wrote it, I was induced to write it after the murder in the United States of George Floyd by a policeman that was recorded on video and shared around the world. Because almost everybody in our field said, we really need to deal with polarization and with all the issues of race by bringing people together in dialogue. And I felt like that was only half the story. It was half the story. We need to reach out across our differences and talk, but we also have to respect and understand the need to change systems that are basically the foundation of racism, of environmental degradation, of misogyny. And that requires systems disruption, that requires building social movements. And if all we talk about is about dialogue and not about the part of it that is maybe not so nice, but how you have to really raise a ruckus and build movements and demand change, then we really are talking about calming things down, and that's about preserving the status quo. So we need to understand, and it's really important to talk about the relationship between those two things. And so looking at my own background and Jackie's background as a social activist and advocates, and my background as a conflict intervener and a peace builder, this book really explores the connection, the potential alliance, but sometimes a very uneasy alliance between those two lines of work. And I think it's actually talks about a foundational issue in our field. which is true for other fields too. I remember when I started in social work school, which I did in 1968, the very first day, people started talking about, well, are we providing a Band-Aid for people, or are we really doing something about changing the circumstances under which people live? And I think that continues to be an issue for us as conflict interveners, for lawyers, for social workers, for medical practitioners, for many, many different people. So that's what this book's about, and it's coming out next Wednesday. So I'm pretty excited about it. It's been a long time in the coming, and I look forward to when you and I will be talking about that in more detail.
So 24th of February, 6:30 p.m. India time, same time, we'll discuss the book. But the only thing was in terms of getting to the root of the problem, because it's been too many years and all this is being discussed for many years, and that whole polarization and everything. What do you think is the root of the problem? Have you ever gone down to that point?
What is the root of the problem of racism and of climate?
Yeah. What do you think?
Oh, well, I think it's the very fundamental systems of our society, that we have vast systems of power inequality, and that we have built our economy based on a system that requires more and more consumption and growth. And so I think we have to, at its root, look at some of the very fundamental ways in which we structure our society. But it's also built on the power differentials in our society, our societies, and that in depending on where you live, those power differentials often exploit the differences among people, like racial differences. And it's also built on patriarchal systems, which have resulted in terrible problems of violence against women, and of sexual harassment and sexual assault. So I think you have to, if you're really going to unpeel it, you have to look at the root of those, and you have to ask yourselves. We have to ask ourselves, what are we really doing to sort of, in system terms, to nucleate change in those systems? What are we doing to disrupt those systems so they have to reorganize in a more constructive way? And I think the work we do is in mediation is, in a sense, an effort to disrupt the legal system, to force it to reorganize in some ways. So it's one small element there. But when we're talking about environmental change, or looking at families, or looking at organizations, we have to look at the ways in which they're fundamentally structured, that are promoting the conflicts that we often get into at a very much more superficial level. So there's lots of stories about that, and lots of discussions about how you do that. And how you, and lots of discussions about how we can, even if we are just working on a specific resolution to a specific problem, we at least need to do that with a sensitivity and a consciousness of the larger impact on whether we're reinforcing a system like that or changing it.
But how I'm looking at it is, I don't know, my theory is, first, let's look at the effects of colonization. Today also, our countries, look, I don't know about Canada. Again, statistics I don't have. US statistics and India statistics I have in terms of the political structure. We call ourselves democracies, which we are not. I don't know when last time I spoke to you about this, but I've been repeating this, that in the US, 33% of the entire votes of the country you get, and you make the government. So definitely you will divide and rule, because you just have to get that 33% together. So now, whether that is that divide and rule policy that the colonizers had, I think that's just continued. In India, it's 25% of the entire votes of the country. So that voice of people, you want everyone to have a voice, but that voice doesn't translate into actually effects in terms of the elections. It seems that 37% stay away from it, and 33% rule the country. So you have a minority government, and a minority government will divide.
Oftentimes in the United States, and I don't know if this is true in India, even of that 33%, it's the smaller amount who are able to elect the government. You can have the Republicans in the U.S. have only won the popular vote in the presidential election once since 1988, and that was the second election of George W. Bush. Every other time, they have had less votes than the Democrats, but they've elected the government, the president, multiple times in there because of the way the system is structured. But I really agree with you that this is rooted in colonialism. And Jackie, my co-author, is Puerto Rican, and she takes has a very strong view that you can't really understand racism if you don't understand colonialism. That racism is fundamentally lodged in a system of colonialism. Now, I suspect in India there were elements of the caste system and all that predate the British takeover of India, but I think modern forms of racism are very much a product of colonialism, which is embedded in imperialism as well. So I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm not saying that we can just go out there and have a few demonstrations and change it, but I think we have to have that consciousness in all the work we do, and that we have to be aware. For example, if we've had a community that has reacted to a police shooting, I'm using the U.S. as an example, and that community gets upset, and that community starts to demonstrate. Those demonstrations are often very angry, and sometimes around the edges there's some property damage and some violence. If all we are trying to do is to damp it down and bring people together to calm things down, we are missing some of the boat. Some of the boat is that anger has to be channeled eventually into more strategic forms of disruption. Maybe that was an interesting flip, or strategic forms of disruption. But we have to also not right away say, let's right away talk. That again is part of the problem, part of the goal, but it's not the whole thing. And we are often therefore seen as agents of system maintenance and not system change. And that's something we need to look at profoundly, and what does that mean, and how does that look, and how have we successfully done that on many occasions?
When I look at the George Floyd situation, two aspects of colonization come out. One, the police to be able to behave in this manner as goons of the government, that they can do what they want, comes from there. We have police acts. I don't know about the US. Now, India police acts are still what the British gave us, because what the colonizer did totally helps the government, because it was made for the person to rule a minority ruling a majority. That's the way it was. Then the demonstrations. In India also we have demonstration. I say, look, that means your judiciary has failed you. If you're out on the street, that means there is something fundamentally wrong, because you are not the colonizer is not sitting there. You're not demonstrating against the colonizer. Demonstrations come in because fundamentally there is some issue in someone getting their rights enforced. So I think it is all I feel that seems to be, for me, the root of the problem, in terms of the way the minds have been conditioned over these hundreds of years to be able to, because I put out something called Vision 2026 for the evolution of mediators and mediation. So for me, one very important aspect of is decolonization. So I'm looking at that. We'll have discussions on this. I just put these points out, and then we'll have a session on decolonization. But I feel
I do agree with you. And I would just add that in some respect, all institutions exist and are allowed to exist, all sanctioned institutions, because they support the society. And so we are, everything we're doing is with that fundamental reality in mind. But that doesn't mean that we can't change things. And change, one of the things we talk about in the book is you sort of have to think systemically, and you have to think globally, because these are global systems, many of them. but you have to figure out how that affects your everyday life, how it affects you locally, and what is it that we can do there. But I certainly agree with you about the police and about the fact that people are on the street is a sign of, and let me add this, it almost doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. If people are really angry and really upset, it's because something isn't working.
No, because look, the point is that if a minority is going to rule a majority, these issues are always going to keep coming up. It will always happen. If the voice of the majority is there, there will be sane voices which will balance things out somewhere or the other. But no, you've put together, like you were saying in India situation, that whole caste system is used in the political system. Religion is used in the political system. You keep dividing and ruling because you just have to get 25% of the entire votes of that constituency. So you patch up, okay, the Muslims are going to vote together. Let's put them together. Let's keep putting that fear in them. The majority is going to do something to you. Come together. So that fear. With the same thing with the caste system. Oh, we are with you. Those guys will discriminate against you. So put that. Okay, I've got 15% here. I've got 10% here. Okay, I've got my 25%. It's all arithmetic. It's not. They're not people. They're just figures there on the paper. Okay, how do we put this together? But
the one thing I would caution you about, though, I agree with almost everything you said. It's easy to frame this so that we all feel hopeless. And that framing of it is actually a very consciously used tool to prevent change from happening. It's very basic. The problems we exist are not new. I wrote a book called Staying with Conflict that looks at how we intervene in long-term conflicts that aren't going to end simply, as I think you know. But I do think progress happens. That doesn't mean, none of this means that we cannot accomplish anything. That it's hopeless, that change is hopeless. So what, because that dooms us. I mean, I think that there's nowhere where that becomes more evident than our attitude towards the climate. Are we really doomed? Like, I don't know if you saw the movie Don't Look Up, but that's a movie that sort of says, yeah, we are doomed basically because we can't face it. Well, I can't predict the future, but I know that we have made progress on a lot of things. And we can continue to. And I kind of buy Martin Luther King's statement that I can't remember the exact words, but the arc of justice is a long one, but it bends upwards. I mean, I think that progress occurs, and setbacks occur, and we don't yet know whether the development of the cerebral cortex will have proved to be a functional evolutionary adaptation. We just don't, which, as I sometimes say, we don't know that yet. Who knows where the long term brings us? But we have made progress, and I believe very much we have to continue doing it. But we don't do it if we try to stay too simplistically focused on just having people come together. I've said for many years, the theme song of our field, to show my age and where I grew up, is not "Come on, people, now smile on your brother. Everybody get together, got to love one another right now." It's more complicated than that. We also have to sometimes get angry. And as the American civil rights leader and long-term congressman who died a year and a half ago, John Lewis, said, we have to learn how to get into good trouble, into necessary trouble. We should never be afraid to do that.
Because look, I think it's simplistic. Why I put it out in a simplistic thing on one aspect of the root of the problem is very easy to change. All you have to do is make voting compulsory. That's all. Once you have that voting compulsory and you have those 37% who did not vote come into the field, I am telling you things will balance out. Then that arithmetic will not work there as much as it is working now. And on the dispute resolution concept, why I talk about this colonization is because we have made the judiciary that they can do what they want kind of judiciary. And for me, mediation in the court system, I have to at some point finish that off, because the mediation, yes, everyone will know, popular, everything, that whole word goes around, but the whole thing doesn't develop. The mediators don't develop, and if mediators don't develop, where is it going to go? So that part of it, for me, the judiciary be able to intervene in mediation, Because we have here a draft bill which has been put into parliament, and they want to make a mediation council, and people are saying so some judge of the Supreme Court should be part of that. I go, what does the Supreme Court judge have to do with mediation? Just keep them away. The point is, all dispute resolutions doesn't happen in courts, and lawyers don't do it. Once that gets out of people's mind, there is such a large area out there for practice which needs to be put out. So that, for me, that is the connection that I'm trying to make.
No, I think it's a good connection. I mean, I have often felt like the way in which, in my history with mediation, when I first started doing it, the legal community was very threatened by it, and they tried to really stomp it down. I remember very early on, there was a complaint when we were doing just, landlord-tenant mediation or community mediation, that, we were engaging, if we were not lawyers, we were engaging in the unauthorized practice of law. And if we were lawyers, we were acting unethically because we were representing two parties with competing interests. And, we basically said, no, that's not good. You can't do that. So eventually they saw this wasn't going to go away. And then they started trying to grab it and own it. And they've been very successful, the legal profession. There's less and less non-lawyer mediators can do in the family area. Like I was just talking to people in Canada yesterday and about if you're not a lawyer, you can't even draft the terms of a settlement agreement about separation without it being reviewed by lawyers. Not even if it's going to be reviewed by lawyers, you can't even draft it, and they're very much against even paralegals being able to do it. And they've also, owned pretty much the arena of commercial mediation and in many aspects of labor management mediation. Not all of them, but it's not like lawyers don't have a role in it, and it's not like there are other issues about people getting beyond their expertise in what they do and safeguards you need to build in, but it's not healthy the way the legal community has become such a dominant community, because means mediation has become more and more and more a rights-based approach, as opposed to an approach that says, let's bring people together to work on their issues in a way that is really considering what their real concerns are, and opens up a more constructive approach. That's another whole discussion as well. But I really do agree with that. And it's not like lawyers shouldn't have a role, but social psychologists,
Exactly.
and economists,
Exactly.
and educators and clergy and the list goes on.
Yeah, because how I've been putting it out is that two people, if they come together and they put down on paper something which is reasonable, which is fair, which is just, which is equitable, that would be the law. Because law is supposed to be all those things. And if the law is not that, then you challenge that law. But if fair people sit together, as reasonable people sit together, they will put down, it won't be illegal. You don't need lawyers to do it for you. And I'm just saying that part of it which has come up. But what I've started doing is all this, they will not leave control over it. So I'm just going down to villages. I'm talking to people and I'm saying, please identify people in your villages who are already doing it. Just go to them. They are helping you resolve disputes. So very nice conversations are happening, and you have these names coming out. And I'm really happy that, of course, those sane people are there, because they'll have a larger role to play in society. Once we bring these people out and people value them, those are the people we need out there. Then I think in the political thing also will be easier.
Again, I really agree with that. I'm really glad to hear you're doing that too. That's terrific. I'd love to hear more about it. But let me just say, a mediative function is as old as we've had people living in groups, which is there's always been that. And like in other areas, our professionalization of it has had some positive aspects, but it's had some negative aspects too, because it suddenly becomes part of this business model that people try to become exclusive in it. But if you want to work in indigenous communities, for example, anywhere, you had better be working with their natural peacemakers. and they know what they're doing. But they may be embedded in other problems and in villages like patriarchal systems. That's something we need to be aware of as well. But this isn't something. I've often been asked as a mediator trainer. I've often been asked as a mediator, well, I didn't want to get into the fact that people were really upset about stuff by people who were mediators, because I'm not a trained therapist. And I always think, but you're a human being.
Exactly.
And we help people and we listen to people and we have to deal with emotional stuff, and we don't always know how to do it best.
No, because I did my last conversation with these teachers from a village in India on Tuesday, but that's in Hindi, so you would not be obviously won't be able to understand that. But the way they explained how those people are going about mediation, it felt so nice that they are totally aware of it. It's all happening there, and people come and sit in it. This whole confidentiality thing, obviously, people have been talking about there. There's no concept of that. They're doing it out in the open. People come and sit and watch it. They learn from that. They learn, okay, they might learn the skills of mediation. Maybe they already have that skill, but also learn how you can, in a collaborative way, resolve disputes. It's all happening out there. I'm trying to put across that we have to value these people, and they should take it as a full-time activity and not just something that they do on the side. Okay, people come and they help them resolve it. So that's the way I'm going about it, and it seems to be, for me, seems to be the right direction. So let's see.
Well, that's good. I worked a number of years back with some Navajo peacemakers in the U.S. Navajo is the largest Native American group in the United States, and they have their whole approach was very. Can you hang on just 1 second? Yeah. Come on, Ted, you can go out of here. My dog was scratching at the door. I wanted to let him out. Their whole approach is fundamentally different, but also in some ways very much the same, because they use a circle process. They have everybody involved in the disputes they deal with come together, and the very first thing they do some religious ceremonies. It's called the smudge ceremony. And then they each declare their clan affiliations as the very first thing they do. And that everybody goes around and says who's their clan, is there matrilineal, patrilineal, there are a variety of different clans. And they have to do that until everybody finds a clan that they're both connected to in some way, including the peacemaker. And what I've always thought, A, it's public like you're describing, but B, as opposed to neutrality, what they're trying to find is connectivity. What gives them legitimacy is not that they're neutral and impartial, but they're connected and that they care and they're committed in some way to the well-being of everybody. So, I think we have a lot to learn from that.
Because with that symposium that I organized in the July and August and September, that with those almost 100 people from 40 countries, this is what I wanted to bring out. Yeah, so it was mediation in our culture and traditions. Of course, a lot of it went about what is currently happening in terms of the law and everything. The one direction went there, but then people came in. There was someone from Canada, Martha Monta, if I'm pronouncing correct. Martha is from the Mohawk community, so she gave her how they're going about it. So there, the good things, interesting things came out there as what people are doing and traditional communities are doing. And I think with discussions, with conversations, if we can, that decolonization we can do, where people move away from that and move towards this side, where for me, even the jail system and everything, for me, that's a whole colonizer giving it to you. How can you take someone's freedom away, an accused freedom away, put them behind bars, and we don't know for how long, and you can get away with it? How do you do it? It's only because of that mindset that judiciary can do what they want, kind of thing. So it's a side thing, but I think we should not. I think we should keep focus on your life. I think that is going to be more interesting.
I think this is very interesting. I'm really, I'm very happy to hear some of this, because it does. I look forward to what you think when you get the book, because I think you'll see that it takes a lot of these issues and tries to bring it right back down to what it means we do in the work we do, both as social activists and as peacemakers or conflict interveners.
Yeah, but you'll have to take me through it
Because
because you know
Jackie has a very strong experience in fighting against colonialism and has written books about it as a Puerto Rican. I think she brings a really important perspective into this too.
So we should bring her on the 24th. Should we make her part of that conversation?
I will definitely invite her. She's definitely not a morning person, but I'll see if she can participate.
But please get a discount code. Let's put it out. Let people get that.
I would be glad to tell you to talk to my publisher about it. I've been trying, but the book's actually pretty cheap to begin with. It's not. It's very reasonably priced to begin with. But I will. I have asked. Let me just say that.
Yeah, because for me that it just feels nice that yes, there is a special Vikram discount. That's what.
Sure.
So that, but I think what we need to do is okay. Let's first go into your history, and this part obviously we'll on the 24th. You'll have to take me through the book. Like I told you, I don't read them, so that's the whole title, talking books, because some of us don't read them.
So you need it from you need the elevator speech version of it then, which I sort of
it can be a little longer. It can be a little longer than the elevator pitch, but
3 elevator rides, 4 elevator rides, something like that.
Yes. So that, because that I'm telling you that actually will help a lot of people, because everyone doesn't actually end up reading these books. They don't, maybe, I don't know, whatever reasons. So at least we put them out, make them interested, and then they can obviously read it. So, but we are going to start from again now, your mother growing up, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. I will tell you a story about new information I got since we last talked about my family history. Not that I want to go through all of this, but my son, who we will show pictures of soon, Mark, and several years ago, he was living with his wife in Paris while she was on a Fulbright scholarship. They drove through the little town in Germany, Hoxheim, where my father and my aunts grew up. Mm-hmm. And they stayed on their way to Berlin, and they stayed in an inn there overnight. And they kind of told the inn that his grandfather had grown up in this little town, and that they would like someone maybe who could show him around and help find the house he grew up with. And suddenly they became the toast of the town, because there was a history guy there who had been wanting to do something in honor of the town's 1250th anniversary or something like that, about the history of the Jews in the town, all of whom they're no longer any there because of the Holocaust. They were either died or they emigrated. But the Jews that were basically in this little town of around 500 or 600 people in the neighboring town were basically all my family.
Wow.
So this guy, they took my son around. It was the time of Hanukkah. They had him light Hanukkah candles in some town place, and this guy started doing a research on my family history. And he came up with a history of my family in this area. There are holes in it, but going back to 1725 or something. My knowledge of my family history goes back to that picture I showed you last time, two generations, and barely that. So he gave us his family tree, and found out the history of the name Mayer, how I was related to the other Jews in the town, how I was related to people I'd met that I didn't completely understand, who were cousins of mine. It was a pretty, this was just a week ago that we had this conversation, and it was pretty interesting. There are parts of it, that aren't that important to me. But the idea that I had roots in this little village that went back as far as they could trace, and that the families were Jews in those years were not allowed to own property, or to go to universities or be professionals, so they were all small tradesmen or small businessmen, and then businesses were like grocery stores or things like that. And that's what they did for like, what is that, 300 years now?
Wow.
So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. But that's the thing. I think this whole history thing, but only thing I'll tell you what the problem with this whole history thing, which I was asking Danny Weinstein, I was talking to him about, of course, when he was growing up. We haven't reached there with you right now, but we'll talk about it when we reach there. That one, your father tells you about what has happened, and you're a young kid. How does that really influence you in terms of hate? That hate and the knowledge of what has happened. How do you balance the two? We'll come. I think we'll come to it when we come there. When you are not in the world anymore right now.
There yet, although I'm thinking about it.
I should not have done that. I should not have done that. I should have got it where it was, because I really find that, because thing is, obviously these conversations are happening around you when you're growing up, and you're a young kid, and I mean all this. How do you take to it? What really happens? Because for me, this evolution of a mediator, why this series is important and why I'm taking you back there, is that how much of that influences you as in terms of your work as a mediator and as a person. So I think that that's why each of those things are important. I mean, that's why I don't want you to skip any of them. The way your father and what his thought process and how he was wanting to do good, the way he wanted to do good, all those are the important things. So that's why I'm saying don't skip. We'll take it slowly. We'll dissect. We'll pause. We'll find out. But let's not go too fast on that.
Okay.
So now we're still at that point. Mother's growing up.
Mother's growing up. Okay. My mother, who was born in 1906, is growing up.
So what did she tell you about that period? And
well, I think I may have said some of this, but my mother was an only child, grew up in Frankfurt, Germany. Her father worked as a factory floor manager, or a manager of a factory. She had a lot of cousins. Her mother came from a very big family, but and some of whom she was close to, some of whom she didn't even really know. She was pulled out of a regular public school as a young adolescent, I believe. I'm not sure of the exact age. And she went to a school that is now a museum in Frankfurt called the Philanthropien, which was a progressive John Dewey type progressive school of that era. It would have been like, immediate post-World War I era, because in the public school, she was experiencing anti-Semitism and bullying of some kind. She wasn't very clear about exactly what, but she did say several times to me that when Hitler came to power, it was somewhat mordant, grim humor. They said that why can't we have that good old-fashioned kind of anti-Semitism back? Because it was enough for her to be taken out of this other school, but it wasn't about rounding people up, etc. So my mother, I think, was quite an introvert naturally, and I don't think she was somebody who. She never talked to me a whole lot about her, hanging with her girlfriends and stuff like that. What she did talk a lot about was joining a youth group that was very much into doing outdoor stuff, and she loved hiking and climbing and going to the Black Forest, the Schwarzwald area of Germany, which is in Bavaria, southern Germany. I think I got my geography right there. And those were the happiest times, I think, of her childhood. And then I'm not sure where you want to go from that.
But in terms of dreams and aspirations that she might have had at that point of time, did she ever talk about that?
I think she was brought up the dream that she would, be a mother, but she also always wanted to have some sort of work life. She didn't want to just she never wanted to be just a stay-at-home mother. In fact, when I was quite young, and she like 6 or 7, well, when I started regular school, I think she went back to work as a social worker. And I think she was pretty committed to that from the get-go, which I think caused some sort of conflict with her own mother. I don't think with her father so much, although she adored her father and had a stressful relationship with her mother. Her father, who I was named after. What she wanted to do, I think, was to have a family, but also to work. And she wanted to work with people, and she loved children. So I think she worked with children. So she went and she was trained in this era, which would have been the sort of late 1920s in social work. But in Germany, to be trained as a social worker, you had to first be trained as a nurse. So she was trained as a nurse first, and then she, as a social worker, she I cannot remember all of the steps, but where I can pick up her career is that she worked for the Jewish Welfare Federation in Germany. But that sort of happened already when the Nazis were just coming to power, and so she couldn't really work anyplace else. And she would have been around 26 years old then. I do know she went to Paris and France and maybe the suburb of Paris, and she did some of her training and some work there for maybe about a year.
So which means schooling and then training as a nurse and that kind of thing. No other education other than that. That's the education.
Well, and then she got trained as a social worker. That was part of it. No, that was her training, but she never was. When she came to the U.S., she continued to work as a social worker. She worked in foster care and adoption and with kids, and she and my father were house parents at a residential treatment center before I was born as well. But she was never counted as somebody who had professional training in social work because of the system is one country versus another. But that's what she did. She was able to work as a caseworker in a child welfare agency.
And parallelly, your father growing up, what's he going through when he?
So my father's story, again, my father talked a lot more about that period of time. My father was willing to talk more. My mother found it painful, but she did tell me stories, but he was more voluble. He was raised in this little town I mentioned earlier, Hoxheim, that my son visited recently. But he's from a very poor family, and he got a scholarship as a young child to go to a school in Frankfurt, which was like a 2-hour train ride away, to study in a religious school to prepare kids to be rabbis. And so at quite a young age, on Monday morning or maybe Sunday night, he would take a train into Frankfurt, stay with his aunt and cousins, and go to the school. And on a Friday night, he would come home. So that was how he initially got an education. But he rebelled against religion. Around the age of 14 or 15 or so. It's a little hard to know exactly how this all came about, but it would have been in the early 1920s. And I think there were a lot of left-wing political movements that he was attracted to happening. He read some philosophers. I mean, he read Spinoza, I remember him telling me, and he decided he didn't believe in a lot of this stuff. And he went through a whole process of deciding this wasn't for him. So he basically rebelled against his father. That caused a real falling out for a number of years. And he quit that school in his late teens. And he entered into a public school, and he found some way of financing himself by doing little jobs at the University of Frankfurt. But it really caused quite a rift. And he didn't do it in a very, let's say, mature way. I remember him telling me that the very first thing he ever did was to eat some meat that had not been properly blessed so that it was kosher. And that was very hard on him. But the moment he broke that barrier, he went whole hog. He ate pork, he ate meat and milk together. He rode his bicycle on a Sabbath, which was total. And he actually told me once about riding his bicycle through a group of kids in the school he used to go to who were very religious and were wearing their kippas, their yarmulkes. And this was a horrible thing to do, and knocking the yarmulke off one of the kids and riding on. So he had a lot of anger in him, I think, about this and rebellious quality, I guess.
But did something trigger it off, or was it just something?
Well, that's, his narrative about it was all an intellectual realization. I suspect, and I honestly never penetrated much more than that, but there has to have been more than that. And I suspect some of it had to do with freeing himself from a fairly authoritarian father who governed the family in a very patriarchal way. And my father was definitely not, he was definitely the alpha in the room wherever I saw him. He was always, he was not somebody to submit to that kind of authority. He certainly expected me to, but he was not one to do it himself. And so I suspect that was a little bit more of the psychodynamics of it, and also wanting to be free of the kind of the presumptions of that little village. I mean, he really saw himself as a urbane man of the 20s, of the Renaissance of the 20s. And if you see pictures of him from that time, he was dressed, always dressed in quite a dapper way. So
where are those pictures? Where are those pictures? Yeah.
This is a very good question. Where are those pictures?
Are we going to get them or not at some stage?
I spent hours looking through pictures for you the other day. I just, because I don't know where they are, but they may be in my brother's house for all I know. But I will, if I can find them, I'll show you.
But what I would want to understand is that his dreams and aspirations before going to that religious school or during that time, did he ever talk about that? What was he thinking?
Well, he thought he was going to grow up to be a rabbi. He thought he was going to be the rabbi. That was going to be his role, the respected, leader of the community, Orthodox rabbi. Not my mother grew up in a very reformed, more, less strict religious setting. But he grew up in a very Orthodox one, and he was going to be an Orthodox rabbi and live by that. And I think he eventually thought that was too restricted for him, and he didn't like it. He later ran this residential treatment center that was part of a Jewish federation of agencies. And it later on became much more open and, not just Jewish kids, not just, be much more diverse, but when I was young, it was still primarily Jewish. And for 20 years, they had Friday evening services that he led along with someone else. And he was very proud of the fact that in all the 20 years of leading that, he never said the word God once. So it shows, I think, he had real conflictual feelings about it because he had rebelled against it. He labeled himself as an atheist, but he wanted me to have a religious education, insisted I get bar mitzvahed. So I think he struggled all his life to put all those things together. He was a huge supporter of Israel, when I had much more mixed feelings about it and still do. And so he, that was, so I think at some point his aspirations were bigger. I think his aspirations were to be an intellectual, much more urbane person. He became very involved in left-wing politics. I think he joined the Communist Party and quit it at several different points in his life because he disagreed with it, but then he joined it again and quit it. I think he finally quit it after Russia invaded Hungary in 1957, but I know that he never was part of it after that. It became actually very negative.
Yeah, but that's like much later. That's like much later. So we have to be able to get there, because I'm just thinking that from his perspective, at that age, what were children thinking of doing? What were the opportunities? What were the thoughts? Because look, it has to be based on that. Yeah,
I think he wanted to become an intellectual. I think he saw himself after that as eventually becoming a university professor, a writer, or a poet. He actually wrote a book of poetry that never got published because it was anti-Nazi, and it got destroyed. He had it destroyed when the Nazis came to power, which I think saved his life probably. But it was already being typeset. So I think his view of himself after he was not going to be a rabbi was more along those lines. Still a teacher. I mean, the rabbi derives from the word teacher. So I think he still saw himself in some way as becoming a teacher, but in a much more secular way, and maybe more grounded in the intellectual ferment of the 20s and mostly the 20s when a lot of this was happening. And he saw himself as a Marxist in those years, although I never was clear in my own later studies how deep his understanding of Marxism really was. And then he was very influenced by Freud. That was the other thing. He became a Freudian too. He started studying psychoanalytic theory too.
But having lived with him that many years, what do you think? What would he, if he had gone in that direction, what would he have been a professor of? Say he was teaching, what would be?
I think he was going to be a professor of philosophy, or his doctorate that he got was technically in German literature, but he always said it was sort of philosophy and education, really. So I think that's what he saw himself as doing. However, knowing him and his how shall I say it, his intellectual style and way of looking at the world, he might have been more interested in having a life that he eventually gravitated to, of working with people in a less removed kind of way. I could see him have eventually becoming interested in being a psychoanalyst or something on that order, which he was more the direction he eventually moved in. But even without the Holocaust and the disruption that caused, my brother was a lifelong professor, and truly that was the right field for him. But not my father. I think he, as much as he liked the world of ideas, his most interesting thing was, how do you really change people, and how do you really work with people? And so I could see him actually moving eventually into the kind of work he did anyhow, even though he had to go back in school and get retrained to do it.
I'm thinking that from the small village that he was in, and to go to this religious school, and that getting out of that village and going there, did he ever talk about that change of situation and how he looked at those places and what changed?
Yeah. He well, I think it was hard on him as a young kid to have to travel and live away from his family in many ways. I think that was hard, but I think he looked back at the village as a place that it was fun to have been from. So that he said something like, he loved to say about himself, "I'm just a peasant from Hoxton." This is a guy who already had his PhD when he said those sort of things. But I think he also thought it was a place that he was very, very happy to get out of.
That mindset we will not be able to today understand, because a village, it is a village, not a village of today that you still get information. You're living in a village where you don't get too much, don't have too much I don't know, information about things, access to, even if you have to read something, not have access to, then suddenly move out of it, that change that happens and suddenly open out into a world. How do you take to it? One is, of course, you're part of it, yes, but how do you take to it? What goes on? That would have been interesting to find out.
Yeah, no, it would have been. It's interesting that I live in a village, a town about the size of the village he grew up in. But I've been in the last week, I'm communicating with you. I did a whole seminar talk, talk for a conference in Australia. I work with people across North America. And you too. It is how we live. We really, the world really is, in a way, a village in that sense. But it's also interesting, and I think he would have liked to have stayed in New York City, where he lived before I was born, in New York State. But he ended up with a job he loved in Cleveland, Ohio, which is a city, but a small, very mid-sized one, and a city that a number of my friends, that's where I grew up, who have often joked about it's a nice place to be from. So maybe there's some sort of continuity there. I don't know.
But it's interesting. That means your father starts off from a small village and the son ends up in a small village. Let's look at it this way and see the transition from that perspective. That's also interesting. And the differences in terms of your thought process today after having lived in the largest places and then moving here. I think we'll look at as we go along later. So today we'll stick to your father and his thought process, because here we're just bringing out, because those are his thoughts that you were exposed to much later. But how did those thoughts come in? What was he going through? So let's just understand from his perspective. So now he's what, about what age would you, have?
What age was he when he he was born in 1907, and I think this was, so it would have been the late 20s, early, the time Hitler, from 28, 29, 30, as Nazis were rising, of course. He suffered some from that. He was physically attacked at one point by a Nazi gang and was beaten pretty badly. It took him, I think he got some concussions from it, and took him a while to heal. But this was also when he was becoming a member of socialist groups and, trying to change the world that way.
But I would
But,
really.
and he was going to school at the University of Frankfurt, and he got his doctorate on the last day Jews could get a doctorate in Germany, because it's when the Nazis came to power, and they had delayed him he had finished his work, but because of anti-Semitic forces in the field, they delayed it quite a bit. But somehow they said, all right, well, if we're going to do it, we need to do it now. And they gave it to him in 1932. That would be.
But this kind of situation, like you're saying, being beaten up by some people and all, where do you move? One is, of course, you look at hitting back, or you want to say retaliation in some way, violence. That is one direction you can take. The other is you can explain it to yourself in some way. So did you talk about that part, and how do you deal with it at that point of time? Because,
well, my father wouldn't have been the type to hit back, just because, not necessarily for strict adherence to nonviolence, but he was not a physical person in a sense. My mother was the athlete in the family. My father liked to sit and read. I don't know how to describe that. He wouldn't have done that, but he spoke out. He saw it in political terms. He saw fighting fascism as a political challenge, and he joined a party, and he joined a faction that was, anyhow, that the politics of that are another story. But he wrote anti-Nazi tracts. Later on, when he was part of an underground effort to resist the Nazis, his role was as the writer of the leaflets and the newsletters and so forth. That was his response to that. And he believed in sticking out as long as possible in Germany to fight fascism. And he paid the price for that as well. So that was his response. Now his emotional response was, I think he, in the way I've come to understand this in later years, I think it took a great psychological and emotional toll on him. I think he suffered, both my parents, I think, suffered PTSD.
Sure, yeah, it must be, because
and not the language I had when I was younger, but I think he struggled with depression. I think he had rage reactions at times to things. He doubted himself. He both believed in himself tremendously and doubted himself tremendously at the same time.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking for a young person, because look, one is you can look at one group doing it to a group, but you also have to look at these individuals doing it to you. These are all individuals. These are people that you're talking about. So how do you deal with that part of it? You can, on a larger level, yes, talk about the philosophies and difference in philosophies and thought processes, but still, finally, it's down to an individual doing it to an individual. How do you deal with that? Because look, I have never experienced it, so I also cannot understand how you would deal with that situation. Someone doing this.
It was hard. It was a lifelong struggle. He went through psychoanalysis at one point when he came to the U.S. In an effort to deal with a lot of that and other things, I'm sure too. But he believed that you talk about it, and he would, very much fall into. And he did. He told me a lot of really hard stories about what it was like to be in concentration camp, for example, or what it was like to have to deal with anti-Semitism in different ways, to what it was like to have to make his way. He had to leave Germany before my mother and brother did, because he got out of a concentration camp and had to leave immediately. And that's a story I'm sure I'll tell you shortly. But, and that was horrible for him. But if he didn't leave, he was going to be taken back. And he got my mother and brother out several weeks later. But he didn't know that he would. And, I think it made him feel that the world was an incredibly vulnerable place, and we were all vulnerable, but his emotional response was to resist and to fight back. Not physically, as I said, but he would have supported people physically fighting back, and he would have fought that. He would have gone into the army in World War II, but he had some medical issues. He was blind in one eye from an attack, actually. No, that was not from an attack. From an incident where he was playing as a kid and somebody threw a snowball in his eye that blinded him mostly in that eye, but it kept him out of the war effort. So he did other stuff. But at any rate, that's I think that he suffered from it, but I also think it made him who he was. And he was a very amazing, charismatic man in many ways, not necessarily always easy on his kids, but also very inspiring.
Well, I just think sometimes that once you've gone through all that, you look back, you even say that, did it actually happen? I mean, at some point of time, I'm sure you think that. Did you actually go through all that, or are these just images somewhere? I don't know. It must be so difficult to balance it out. I don't know.
Well, that's true. And I think a lot of people have that. My wife, who's written about it, she wrote a book called Going Public about these experiences, is a survivor of sexual abuse from an Anglican priest when she was a teenager, and of domestic violence in a relationship later on. And she looks back on it, and her memories are very vivid, but there's also sometimes could that really have happened to me? I mean, I think the question, how did I survive that? How could I be normal with that? Yeah. And the Holocaust, the experiences of people in the Holocaust certainly many of them are like that. I mean, my father had 3 siblings, one of who, came over early 1930s, the early years of Hitler, and then became an American soldier and was killed on Guam in World War II. And then he had three sisters who I knew were my aunts growing up, two of whom never really got an education. And another aunt who did also became a social worker, who I was very much involved with all of them, but that aunt I was particularly close to. And she told me also, she was traumatized too. She wasn't in a concentration camp, but she was on the first ship that Germany, the first English ship that Germany torpedoed and sunk in World War II, the Athenia, and she was in a lifeboat with kids for 48 hours, and she was not a swimmer. She was very small and had been frail for a lot of physical ailments as a kid. And she told me all these stories too. She also believed in talking about it, and she also became a social worker and went through therapy and had PTSD too. So I also had her perspective on a lot of it. I remember when she first told me this story of the torpedoing of her ship. I must have been around 11 or 10 years old, and she used to go on vacation with us. And we were on a boat that was taking us on a tour of this lake that we were staying on, and a little cabin on. And it was while we were on the boat that she told me about her ship being torpedoed and how much she really had to overcome fear of water. And we were on a boat on this lake on a tour. And I thought, well, this is interesting. Even then, as a young kid, I thought, well, this is an interesting setting to tell me this story. So I think if you don't have the counter factual. You don't know what my father or my aunt or my mother, or for that my brother was born in Germany too, what they would have been like if it had it been different. But you only know what they were like. But the one thing I do know is it definitely had a strong impact on them.
I'm thinking now, of course, you're not in the scene right now. You haven't come into the world yet. But I'm just thinking that
I think it's time for me to come into the world.
I don't know. We'll have to see that. No, but I'm just thinking that how much of that then gets passed on to you, because all the stories that you hear, you in a way live it in your mind. Of course, not the same. You will make your own pictures, because obviously there are no pictures to put there. So you make the own pictures. How much of that affects you? And does it affect you even worse than what they get affected by that? How does that work? Because this is totally, in a way, not so new, because in India, when the India and Pakistan got that partitioned, then obviously we hear stories about people who came from there, and obviously there was a lot of people who were killed while they were moving, and how within their neighborhoods, people who were living there, and how all that happened. So you hear those, but because my mother and her family were not directly affected, some relatives were, but they had come in before that. So that part of it, I would not have so much of that. So you would maybe, as we go along, tell us how those stories, I don't know how young you were when you were hearing all that. So how did that affect you? That should be interesting. So no.
Well, but you don't want me to talk about that now. Is that one of these things?
No, yeah, because no, because I tell you why.
The biblical saying, the sins of the parents shall be visited upon the children. One version says for 3 generations, another says for 7. If you reinterpret that slightly, there is a generational transmission of trauma of some kind. I would never say that my experience on me was in any way worse or harsher than on them at all. But I do think I've had an impact. It's had an impact on me.
Because one end I see, look, there was this person who's from Japan. So his mother was in Hiroshima when that happened. So he says she never spoke about it. She didn't speak about it. So I think there is one way of going about it, is that don't even talk about it.
That was when my mother felt she needed to after my father died, but it was hard for her to talk about it. It was very hard. Maybe because she lost her parents in the Holocaust.
Obviously, I mean, we're talking about very young people. It must be really young when that happened for them, and to be able to make sense of it. And how do you make sense of it? You're trying to make sense of it. Maybe, I don't know if you are. How do you go about it? So, and there's nothing else. I mean, it's just new for everyone. It's not that there is something happened and you know how to handle these things. It's
Right.
totally.
Well, trying to make sense of it is one thing that it's in the book I just described earlier. How do we make sense of behavior that makes no sense?
Exactly.
And so there's a chapter in there that I call Beyond Crazy, Stupid, or Evil, which is what I think are the three crutches we use to explain things we can't explain. Is it happened because somebody's either crazy, stupid, or evil? Well, that may be true, but it doesn't explain much. So how does it really, how do we really understand it? And the Holocaust puts you, that's the, in my experience anyhow, that's the, how do you explain the Holocaust beyond saying that it was evil, which it was? How do you explain it? Why did it happen? There's always
Exactly.
evil. Why did that happen?
Yeah. I know. I'm telling you, look, of course, that
That
was a
time
yeah.
in that way. I'm sorry?
Yeah, no, because what that was at a totally different scale. But what we saw in Delhi. I mean, talk about Delhi. Okay, we're sitting in Delhi, 1984. The Indian Prime Minister gets assassinated. Immediately, there are people on the street burning people. They're burning them in the middle of the street. How does that really happen? And this is not a religious concept. Okay, this is just that some Sikh had killed her, and of course had mentioned the whole concept was that it came from the attack on their religious place. But I'm just thinking that was one, yeah, that was one part of it. But finally, these are people who are not looking at it from that perspective. It's a political thing, but you can actually burn people in the middle of a street, and it can just happen like that. It happened in one. Look, there's no planning on it. It was that one night. You happened today, next day this was happening. So what goes on? I mean, this is. I mean, it's just.
Well, all right. So I will tell you that that event has had an impact on my family too, because my son-in-law is Sikh, and his family fled India after that. And they first moved to Uganda, and then they moved to the UK, which is where they live now, and that's where he was born.
Yeah. So then I think maybe that conversation with him, okay, maybe with his parents or with him, I don't know. He must have been young. He must be very young that time.
Well, he was born in the UK.
Yeah. So,
his parents were the ones who, and I have talked to them a little about it.
because this is still, I mean, something that they're there. You can actually talk about it, because how does that happen? How do they look at it? I mean, how do they even relate to these? Are people who were, look, I'm still saying these were not people they were living with. I mean, it's not that it happened with people from that neighborhood. This was a political thing. So people came from outside into those neighborhoods and did it. But just the fact to be able to even understand that this is someone being burnt. I mean, I was living here, and you would see fires all around. I mean, you would just see smoke everywhere, and you had a friend there. You went to his house and stayed there. So if someone comes, you'll be out there, whatever. But you just don't understand how that happens. And it's like that. It's not, I'm not saying there's any planning to it. It's how does that mind work? It just,
and that's a question we can speculate, but but it doesn't have to be that. For me, how do you understand people who are anti-vaxxers, who are refusing to take vaccines, as an example of something much more immediate? It makes no sense to me. It seems like a total self-destructive, but also destructive to the community.
yeah, that's the point.
But in order to understand it, and I think we have to start with a couple of things that, from their own perspective, in some way it makes sense, and it is reflective of some real underlying issues, as you said earlier, in our society and in our social structure. It doesn't excuse it. It doesn't say it's okay that it's not evil. It just says you have to understand it. At least you have to ask questions. How do they understand it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, those are things which, okay, maybe it becomes like one of those things that you want to do, but it finally doesn't really happen to get that thought process. It's just down to the thought process. What happens at that point of time when you make whatever decisions you take, or that thought that you get, where society in general you're not looking at, and you're looking at something totally different, and how outlook on life and people. How does that really work? I want to get into that mind, which you should please do that. Get into those minds and understand that.
I wish we could do that, certainly. But, let me just sort of go back to a mediator skill, I think, or a mindset. I think that we have to be curious. That is a critical part of what we are, and interested in people. But we also have to know that we can never know. And that uncertainty, uncertainty is we have to be able to tolerate uncertainty, to tolerate ambiguity, to tolerate, things, the gray area, if you will. And not only to tolerate it, but to embrace it and to dive into the uncertainty as well, because it is the effort to be certain about things that you really can't be certain about that gets in people's way often. So I've often said, as a mediator, if I could say 3 words to people to help them approach conflict in a more constructive way, it would be less certain. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, and we shouldn't be curious, and we shouldn't have the mindset that you're describing that says, let's get it. Let's get into this. Let's try to figure this out, and let's try to figure it out beyond the simple answers, knowing that we'll never completely figure it out.
Because
And
on the
I know,
mediation, yeah.
And that you have mediated disputes, and that you never know completely what's going on, and you never will know completely. And there may have been stuff going on that really would shock you to know what's going on that you never found out about. Because sometimes we do find out about it. I always remember mediating a dispute between a owner of a business and his primary associate. They had a big dispute. They hired me. I went through the whole thing. We got an agreement. And afterwards, they say, all right, thank you. This really helped. We really appreciate it. Now we think we should tell you that we're also lovers. I thought, oh, did you really have to tell me that? And I had no idea. And it made me think, how often has that happened to me before?
But I still feel I look at mediation, and I keep talking about this heart, soul, and spirituality thing. I said at some point you just have to draw them out of all that, and you have to get that energy into the space where then these are not aspects that you need to get in also, and maybe you're not getting in, you're getting them out, and then that is what you bring in. That's I've been talking about that. I think that's one area which, of course, I'll be exploring as part of my vision 2026. So that's called decolonization. I told you, heart, soul, and spirituality is also a very important part, which I feel has not been explored enough. You will hear me talk about it a lot of times, but I'll show you what I'm doing next month. And that one of the sessions I have is on that. So but you'll have to tell me whenever 5 minutes before you have to leave, because I'll have to take you what's happening in February. I like to put it out so that.
We're approaching 5 minutes, but we probably
Perfect.
have 10.
Okay, so let me just take you through that, and then we can, because for me, of course, first what we should do is we should tell you, people should know where you're sitting. So let us see the beautiful place that you are sitting in.
Okay.
This is where you are.
This is the view actually from my bedroom, but it's a view across frozen Lake Erie towards the town of Kingsville. And that you see the boat. It's early. I like that picture because it's the early morning light, sunrise light. That is that boat there is a ferry that it's now in winter mooring, but it takes you to this island in Lake Erie called Pelee Island that we like to go on and spend a few days each year, and it's what we see right at a horizon. And we're actually looking at our neighbor's steps down to the lake because we're looking in that direction, but we have similar steps down to the lake from our place too.
Yeah, this is important. This is where we have to get. All that evolution is taking us here. So this is where we have to end up. So let's see that part. And of course, your wife. Yes.
My wife is Julie McFarland. She's sitting. We have a little. We call it the cabana. It's a little hut right on the water that she's sitting in with this time it's a sunrise time, which is low. And Julie was for 40 years a law professor, and she's left the law school now and has been a mediator as well, and a researcher. And I mentioned her earlier. She's working right now on a campaign to deal with the problem of non-disclosure agreements, which are the agreements, particularly in the area of misconduct, which is how these agreements silence victims from talking about what happened if they're going to get an agreement or a settlement. And it's what allows people to move from one position to another and continue to exploit people, whether they're professors or the Harvey Weinsteins of the world, or or athletes, or priests, or whoever. And she was, as I say, abused as by a priest in her adolescence, who, it's a long story, but who's now in jail in the United Kingdom. And she's, her partner in this campaign is a woman named Zelda Perkins, who was Harvey Weinstein's assistant, the movie producer, who was the first person to break a non-disclosure agreement. It's her. And there's tremendous progress being made. And if anybody's interested in that, they should Google "Can't Buy My Silence." The website, it's quite amazing what's happening. They're changing the laws about this in the UK, provinces in Canada and California, and it's connected to the work that she does. Anyhow, that's Julie sitting in our cabana about 6 weeks ago.
But what I should have been calling you, I should have been calling you Grandfather Bernie. Where are those pictures? Are we not going to see that? Those pictures of your grandchild?
No, you're not, and I'll tell you why. Because my daughter
yes.
don't want to put pictures of their child up on social media yet. You can see pictures of them, but they're waiting until maybe he has a little more voice in what pictures he wants out.
Okay, no, that's right. That's right.
I'll show you his pictures, but I can't put it up on.
Perfect. So okay, so what I'm going to do?
It's right here. There's a picture of him sitting right here, and a picture of him sitting right here.
Okay, so after we stop the live stream and the recording, we'll have a look at that. But let me just take you what's happening and what's coming up in February. Of course, January I won't take you through because that's a long list. So I'll just take you through February. So this is that show that I do in conversation with the beautiful mind. So these are conversations with people with the Mediator mindset. There's of course, none of the shows that I do, there's any script or any pre-decided questions. It's just a flow of conversation. You can go anywhere. So that's how it is. This is a lecture which Kathy is giving on Just Eyes, Collaborative Poetry, and Climate Change Mediation. Should be interesting. This should be interesting. Great. Then we have, this is what I was saying, part of the Vision 2026, Heart, Soul, and Spirituality. So we'll be discussing that. Very interesting discussions we've had in previous shows that I've done with her. Interesting conversations. And this is from Brazil. This is again that same show. This is what I'm doing here, Mahatma Gandhi and mediation. So just to see what, because I mean, Henry has also written a book right now. But these are Henry and Vidya Jain are scholars in Gandhian philosophy. Vidya works for the Ministry of Culture, and there's something called Gandhi Smriti and Darshan Samiti works there. Both of them are there. So it should be interesting, I think, because I feel that let's explore it. Let's explore this. It should be an area to be explored. Okay, this is that conversation from Russia. I don't know whether you saw, there was this little clip she sent me, which I put it out on social media about the New Year clip. Very nice. Maybe I'll show it to you separately. I'll put it out. Then this is Mediator experiences is started off as memorable experiences that mediators have. And this is not in a mediation, in the mediation world. But then I found out about this Weinstein Jams International Fellowship. So I said, let's take the experience of these fellows with the fellowship, because I mean, they've done a good job. Danny Weinstein done a good job in selecting these people. So they're wonderful people, all of them. So let's get their stories. So that's what now it's like. This is the 19th one coming. 18 of them have been done. This one, I don't know if you remember. No, this person has written this new book that he's come out with. So this is 24th February, 6:30, right? So, and hopefully maybe we'll get a discount code, which we'll put here if you get that.
If I can, I will. If not, it's not that expensive.
Isaac is in Ghana, and Then we have Michael coming in. Mediation visionary was, tell us what you think in 2026, where we are going to go, challenges and all that. He doesn't know about this. He knows. I told him, look, I'm keeping this date for you. What you're going to do, because one is that I've done that show called Mediator Reflects with him. So he got his practice group from Ireland onto that show. First time his practice group had actually been recorded and put live on YouTube, because otherwise it's a very closed room kind of activity. So that was now he's like I keep saying, he's tasted blood. Now he's been doing this in other places also. So
I've been in communication with him in the last couple of days. Michael's an old.
Yeah, I know. But did he speak about his experience on that? Maybe you have more to talk about.
It was a more instrumental communication.
And this is part 2 of that, because this one, part 1 happened in in January. And that's about it. The other thing that happens at the end of the month, on the last day, is that celebrating mediators, celebrating the birthdays of mediators in that month. That hasn't been put up here, but that also happens. So this was just to take you through that part.
That's very impressive.
I'm trying to put out different things. Like for me, I just want to put mediators out there. People should know that, okay, these are mediators. Look, maybe in the US, maybe in Canada, people are still familiar. Otherwise, places like India, I mean, there is, like I said, this court system kind of thing. That's a different concept altogether. You have to develop a lot on the other side. And mediators in terms of social change, that part of it, I keep talking about these people in Peru who are mediating where communities are affected by mining projects. I felt that
a very, very close colleague who's done a lot of work in exactly there from CDR.
So, but that's also in Peru.
Well, she did it. That's not where she's working now, but she had in the past. She spent quite a bit of time in Peru working on it.
But isn't that interesting that one place has so much activity on this area, which I don't see anywhere else? So it's very, I mean, I'm trying to get.
She's working elsewhere too on similar issues.
Okay.
But Peru really was a big, long, interesting project.
I've had 2 people who've been on my shows. One of them has been on various things, my In Conversation, Beautiful Mind, Symposium, and Media. And after that also there was one lecture he gave. So we've got a lot of information on the work they're doing there. Now to take it to other places. So at least I'm saying, let's start with India and we take it to other places. I found that was interesting work. So that's, and of course with you, don't forget, I mean, I will not forget, but your experience with the Juniper Street Collective and the CDR part of it, that we have to explore very well.
But we had better get to where I'm on
whenever we get there, that has to be explored in detailed manner, because of the fact that the work that I am doing, this balance of individual and group kind of thing, I'm really interested to hear your experience.
We have to talk about it. We will.
Yeah. So maybe we can finish this episode, and then we'll take it up. When are we taking it up next? When you're giving me time?
Have a date. Let's do the book thing, and then we'll create a date.
Yeah, in March. Yeah. Okay, we will do that. All right. So thank you, Bernie. It was very nice to have you again.
Talking to you.
And I'm really enjoying it. So I'm taking it slow. So I'll take it slow. So let me just put the